The Academy's workshops were busy places even after classes ended. In Workshop Bay 7, bright sparks flew everywhere as Tyke shaped his mountain breaker hammer from starfire metal that came from the heart of a dying sun. 3 workshops away, Kira grew crystal formations that would become her people's famous ice blade, a weapon that could freeze a target's blood inside their body. The sounds of grinding, melting, and energy forming filled the air as students made their family weapons in Workshop Bay 12. The smallest and quietest workshop, Dongmin worked alone with simple hand tools. No energy forges, no molecule makers, no gravity shapers. Just a small knife, a piece of rough stone, and lots of time. He had carefully taken 3 pieces from his classroom bench. Each piece was picked for its grain and strength. The oak was harder than most aliens knew. Earth trees grew slowly, fighting wind and weather for many years. This made wood that was both flexible and very strong young. Su, a curious student from the water world of Tidal, floated past in his water-filled suit. His big eyes got wide when he saw Dongmin sitting cross-legged on the floor, carefully cutting thin curls of wood with his knife. "What are you making?" Young Su asked, his voice making bubbles through his water mask. "A spear," Dongmin said, not looking up from his work. "Just one." Young Su's confusion was easy to hear. Most weapons at the Academy came in pairs or were part of complex systems. Where are the energy cells? The targeting computer? The plasma core. Dong Emin held up the straight piece of oak he was shaping. "It does not need any of those things." Word moved quickly through the workshop levels. Students started stopping by Workshop Bay 12 to watch the human work. They expected to see something amazing, some hidden technology or secret process. Instead, they found Dongmin doing what humans had done around campfires for thousands of years. He carved, he scraped, he tested the balance, he carved some more. "This is boring," complained Wu Jin, a student whose people fought with weapons made of pure light. "Where is the excitement? Where is the power source?" "The power source is here," Dongmin said, tapping his head with one finger. By midnight, most students had gone back to their sleeping rooms, their high-tech weapons complete and charging in energy bays. But Dongmin stayed in the workshop, working by the light of a simple lamp. His spear was taking shape, smooth and deadly in its simpleness. The shaft was perfectly straight as long as he was tall. The point was carved from the hardest part of the oak, shaped to a needle-sharp tip that could punch through most materials. But the real genius was in the balance. Every shaving removed, every curve carved, was designed to make the weapon feel like part of his arm. At 3 in the morning, Hana found him still working. Her leaf-like skin rustled softly as she came closer. "Do you not need to sleep?" she asked. "Sleep is for when the work is done," Dongmin replied. He was now fire-hardening the spear tip, turning it over a small flame with the patience of someone who knew that good things take time. "But tomorrow's competition starts at dawn. You have been working for 9 hours on one simple weapon." Dongmin looked up at her with tired but determined eyes. "My ancestors spent weeks making a single spear. They knew that your life might depend on getting every detail right. 9 hours is nothing." Hana watched him work for a while longer, her plant-like curiosity growing. "In my world, we grow our weapons. They form in minutes and are stronger than any carved tool could be. But do they feel right in your hands?" Dongmin asked. "Do you know every grain, every curve, every balance point? When you hold your grown weapon, is it part of you?" Hana thought about this. Her people's weapons were strong, but they were also identical, mass-produced by biological processes. She had never thought about the connection between warrior and weapon. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the workshop windows, Dongmin finally stood and lifted his completed spear. It was beautiful in its simpleness. The wood gleamed with a deep golden color, polished smooth as silk. The point was sharp enough to cut air itself. He spun, at once testing its balance, and the weapon moved like liquid lightning in his hands. Every movement was perfect, controlled deadly. "Now it is done," he said quietly. Outside, the Academy's bells began to ring, calling all students to the combat arena. It was time to see which of the galaxy's weapons would prove better. But as Dongmin walked toward the arena, carrying nothing but a sharpened piece of earth oak, He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he could do. The other students had built weapons of incredible power and complexity, but Dongmin had carved something else. He had carved 10,000 years of human survival instinct into a piece of wood, and that he thought with a small smile might just be enough. In the hallways, other students passed him carrying their amazing weapons. Some looked at his simple spear and shook their heads. Others whispered to their friends about how the human was going to embarrass himself. But a few, the ones who had watched him work through the night, looked at him with something that might have been respect. They had seen the care he put into every cut, every curve, every detail. They had seen him work with the patience and skill of someone who understood that a weapon was more than just a tool. It was an extension of the warrior's soul. As they all walked toward the arena, the morning sun streaming through the crystal walls, Dongmin felt ready. He had put everything he knew, everything his ancestors had taught him, into this simple piece of wood. Now it was time to show the galaxy what a human could do with a sharp stick and 10,000 years of survival wisdom. The arena doors opened before them, and the real test was about to begin. The Galactic Military Academy floated in the void between three suns, its crystal walls gleaming with the light of distant stars. Inside Classroom 7, 37 students from across the galaxy sat in curved benches, listening to Professor Veltar explain ancient warfare. The professor's forearms moved gracefully as he displayed holographic weapons from different worlds. These primitive tools show how lesser species once fought, the professor said, his voice filled with amusement. Energy swords, plasma rifles, and quantum cannons appeared in the air. Thankfully, we have evolved beyond such crude methods. In the back row, Dongmin sat quietly, his human hands folded on the wooden bench. The other students whispered among themselves, their various alien features making the classroom look like a rainbow of different worlds. There was blue-skinned Kira from the ice planet, tall and elegant, with crystal-like hair. Next to her sat Tyke, a rock creature whose stone skin sparkled with tiny gems. In front, the snake-like beings coiled around their seats, their scales shifting colors with their emotions. Now let us examine the most laughable weapons of all, Professor Veltar continued, and images of spears, swords, and bows filled the air. Sharp sticks, can you imagine? Species actually threw pointed wood at their enemies. The classroom erupted in laughter. Students from the gas giant worlds made buzzing sounds of amusement, while the crystalline beings chimed like broken glass. Even quiet Hana, the plant-like girl whose leaves rustled when she moved, shook with silent giggles. Dongmin said nothing. His dark eyes studied the wooden bench beneath his hands. It was made from real earth oak, brought here as a curiosity from his primitive world. The grain ran straight and true, perfect for what humans had done for thousands of years. Human Dongmin, the professor called out suddenly. Perhaps you can enlighten us about these tools from your world? All eyes turned to the young human. Some students leaned forward with interest, others barely contained their laughter. Dongmin stood slowly, his average height making him seem small among the towering aliens and floating energy beings. We used what worked, he said simply. This caused another wave of laughter. Kira's crystalline hair tinkled like wind chimes. What worked? Against what, Professor? Angry plants? The effectiveness of a weapon, Dongmin continued, his voice steady, isn't always about how much energy it uses or how far it can reach. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't expect. Professor Veltar's eye stalks swiveled to focus on the human. Are you suggesting that a pointed stick could compete with a plasma rifle that can vaporize a building? Dongmin's lips curved in a small smile. I'm suggesting that you shouldn't judge something until you understand it completely. The professor's expression shifted to something between amusement and curiosity. Very well, human. Since you seem so confident in these primitive methods, perhaps you would care to demonstrate. Tomorrow, we will hold a practical exercise. Each student will choose a weapon from their world's history to use in combat simulation. The classroom buzzed with excitement. Students began discussing their choices. Tyke would use the mountain breaker, hammers of his people. Hana spoke of thorn shooters that could pierce metal armor. The gas cloud beings whispered about weapons that could freeze the air itself. "And you, Dongmin?" the professor asked. "What primitive weapon will you choose to embarrass yourself with?" Dongmin ran his hand along the smooth surface of his bench one more time. The oak was seasoned perfectly, dried and strong. In his mind, he could already see its potential. "I'll make something," he said quietly. This brought the biggest laugh yet. Students from across the galaxy joined in, their various sounds of amusement filling the crystal classroom. Some slapped their desks, others fluttered their wings, and a few changed colors rapidly to show their joy. "Make something?" Professor Veltar's voice dripped with disbelief. "From what?" Dongmin looked around the classroom at all the laughing faces, then down at his bench again. "From whatever I can find." As the class period ended and students began filing out, they continued to chuckle about the humans' foolish confidence. They spoke in their various languages about how tomorrow would be entertaining, watching the primitive human fail with whatever crude weapon he managed to cobble together. None of them noticed that Dongmin stayed behind, running his hands along the oak bench and studying its grain with the careful eyes of someone whose ancestors had worked with wood for 10,000 years. None of them remembered that humans had conquered their entire world armed with nothing but sharpened sticks and the intelligence to use them well. Tomorrow would indeed be entertaining, but perhaps not in the way they expected. The grand combat arena of the Galactic Military Academy was amazing to see. The dome-shaped building could change its inside to match any place in the known galaxy. Today, it showed a simple flat field with scattered rocks and patches of tall grass, designed to give no species an unfair advantage. In the watching galleries above, hundreds of students and teachers gathered to watch. The morning sun came through the arenas, clear ceiling making long shadows across the field. Below, Professor Veltar stood at the control area, his forearms working different displays. "Today's test will check not just the power of your chosen weapons, but your skill in using them," he announced, his voice echoing through the arena. "Each student will face 3 challenges: accuracy, power, and how well you can adapt." The 37 students stood in a line at the arena's edge. Their weapons were as different as the galaxy itself. Kira held her ice blade, which hummed with freezing energy and left frost patterns in the air. Airtight carried his mountain breaker, a hammer so heavy it left dents in the metal floor. Young Su wore his pressure suit and held weapons that shot high-speed water streams that could cut through steel. And at the end of the line stood Dongmin, holding what looked like nothing more than a wooden stick. "Look at the human," whispered Sujin, a student whose people used weapons made of crystallized sound. "He is not even wearing armor." It was true. While other students wore their species' traditional battle gear, Dongmin stood in simple clothes, holding his spear with relaxed confidence. Some students in the gallery began to laugh and point. "First challenge, accuracy," Professor Veltar announced. Across the arena, targets appeared at different distances. Some hovered in the air. Others moved in random patterns. The closest was 50 meters away. The farthest, nearly 300 meters away. Students began to line up for their turns. Kira stepped forward, first her ice blade crackling with energy. She threw it with perfect form, and the weapon flew straight and true, hitting a moving target dead center before appearing back in her hand through teleportation technology. The crowd cheered. Tayek followed his mountain breaker, changing into a projectile mode and smashing through 3 targets in a row. More cheers echoed through the arena. One by one, the students showed off their weapons. Energy beams turned targets into smoke instantly. Sound weapons broke them into dust. Living projectiles sought their targets like hunting animals. When Dongmin's turn came, the arena became unusually quiet. He walked to the throwing line, his spear held loosely in his right hand. The target seemed impossibly far away for someone armed with only sharpened wood. "Which target would you like to try?" Human Professor Veltar asked, barely hiding his amusement. Dongmin studied the field for a long moment. The targets moved in complex patterns, some spinning, others weaving unpredictably through the air. He chose the most distant one, a small disc hovering at the very edge of the arena. "That one," he said, pointing with his spear. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Even young Su, who had watched Dongmin work all night, looked worried. 300 meters was an impossible. distance for a thrown weapon, especially one made of wood. Dongmin stepped back. The spear balanced perfectly in his grip. He breathed slowly, his eyes locked on the distant target. For a moment he seemed to go completely still, as if he had become part of the arena itself. Then he moved. The spear left his hand like a bolt of lightning. It flew in a perfect arc, spinning slowly as it cut through the air. The gallery fell silent as everyone watched its flight path. The weapon traveled farther than should have been possible, its aerodynamic shape and perfect balance carrying it beyond the limits of normal physics. The spear struck the distant target dead center with a sound like thunder. The target exploded into pieces, destroyed by the kinetic energy of simple wood traveling at incredible speed. The arena was dead silent. Then Dongmin did something that made everyone gasp. He raised his hand and called out in a clear voice, "Return." Across the arena, his spear began to glow with a soft golden porcidur, but this was not technology. It was not energy or magic or any kind of advanced system. It was something else entirely. The spear flew back across the arena, spinning end over end, and landed perfectly in Dongmin's outstretched hand as it touched. His palm, the golden glow faded, leaving only polished wood. Professor Veltar's eye stalks swiveled in confusion. His instruments showed no energy readings, no technological signatures. According to every scanner in the arena, Dongmin had just done an impossible thing, using nothing but carved wood and some unknown property that could not be measured. How was all the professor managed to say? Dongmin smiled, his spear once again held casually at his side. "My ancestors learned that if you put enough of yourself into making something, it becomes part of you, and part of you becomes part of it." He looked around at the silent gallery, then at his fellow students who were staring at him with new expressions. The laughter was gone, replaced by something that might have been the beginning of respect. "The weapon is not just the wood," Dongmin continued. "It is the 10,000 years of human knowledge I carved into it. It is every hunter who ever threw a spear to feed his family. It is every warrior who ever stood against impossible odds with nothing but sharpened wood and courage." He paused, then added with quiet intensity, "You see a primitive weapon. I see the tool that made humanity the most successful predator species in the history of Earth." The second challenge had not even begun, but already the atmosphere in the arena had changed completely. The alien students were no longer looking at a human with a stick. They were looking at something they had never encountered before, a weapon that was more than the sum of its parts, wielded by someone who understood that true strength came not from technology, but from the will to survive. In the gallery, whispers began to spread. Students who had been laughing minutes before now watched Dongmin with careful attention. They were beginning to understand that they had made a mistake in judging this human and his simple weapon. Professor Veltar cleared his throat and tried to regain control of the situation. "Well, that was certainly interesting," he said now for the second challenge. But even as he spoke, the professor found himself looking at Dongmin with new eyes. The young human stood calmly waiting for the next test, his wooden spear held with casual confidence. And for the first time since the demonstration began, Professor Veltar wondered if perhaps there was more to primitive weapons than he had ever imagined. The arena prepared for the power test, but already everyone knew that nothing would be quite the same after what they had just witnessed. For the final challenge, Professor Veltar activated the arena's most sophisticated program. The floor began to shift and change, creating a complex environment filled with moving obstacles, changing terrain, and multiple threats. Holographic enemies appeared throughout the space, each one programmed with different combat patterns and defensive capabilities. Third challenge, adaptability. The professor announced, "Each student will enter this combat simulation and face 5 different scenarios. Your weapon must prove effective against various enemies in changing conditions. This is the true test of military effectiveness." The challenge was frightening. Students would face energy-based enemies that could only be harmed by physical weapons, armored opponents that required precise strikes, fast-moving targets that demanded exceptional accuracy, swarm enemies that needed area effect attacks, and finally, a massive boss-level threat that would test every skill they had developed. Kira entered first, her ice blade adapting beautifully to each scenario. Against energy enemies, the blade's matter disruption field proved effective. Against armored foes, she found weak points with surgical precision. The crowd cheered as she completed all 5 scenarios. With grace and skill, Tyke's Mountain Breaker proved equally versatile, growing and shrinking as needed, changing from hammer to projectile to area effect weapon. His raw power overwhelmed most opponents, though he struggled slightly with the faster moving targets. Student after student entered the simulation, each demonstrating their weapons' capabilities and limitations. Some struggled with certain scenarios, others excelled in unexpected ways. Young Sao's water weapons proved surprisingly effective against energy-based enemies, while Sujin's sound attacks confused and disoriented multiple opponent types. Finally, it was Dongmin's turn. He walked to the simulation entry point, his wooden spear held comfortably in one hand. The gallery had grown quiet again, everyone curious to see how a simple carved weapon would handle challenges designed for advanced military technology. "Are you ready?" Human Professor Veltar asked. Dongmin nodded and stepped into the simulation. The first scenario materialized. Around him, 3 energy-based opponents floating in a triangular formation, their bodies crackling with dangerous electrical fields. These enemies were specifically designed to defeat physical weapons, absorbing kinetic energy and converting it to fuel their own attacks. Most students had struggled with this scenario, requiring specialized equipment or techniques to damage enemies that grew stronger when struck by conventional weapons. Dongmin studied his opponents for a moment, then did something unexpected. Instead of attacking directly, he began to move in a complex pattern, his spear spinning in defensive formations around his body. The energy enemies launched bolts of electricity at him, but the spinning spear somehow deflected, them sending the energy crackling harmlessly into the ground. Then Dongmin shifted to offense, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of throwing his spear at the enemies, he threw it at the arena wall behind them. The weapon struck the surface and bounced, ricocheting at an angle that brought it sweeping through all 3 enemies from behind, where their energy fields were weakest. The first scenario dissolved as the enemies were destroyed by a single perfectly calculated ricochet. The spear returned to Dongmin's hand as if it had never left. Remarkable trajectory calculation. Professor Veltar muttered to his assistant. The second scenario loaded a heavily armored opponent with thick metal plating and no obvious weak points. This challenge required either overwhelming force or surgical precision. To find gaps in the armor, Dongmin circled his enemy slowly, his spear held low and ready. The armored figure launched a series of attacks, massive metal fists that could crush most opponents, but Dongmin flowed around the attacks like water, never quite where the enemy expected him to be. Then he struck not once, but 7 times in rapid succession. His spear found every joint in the armor, every connection point, every structural weakness. The armored enemy collapsed in pieces, its protective shell rendered useless by precise knowledge of how armor worked. The third scenario began immediately, a swarm of fast-moving enemies, dozens of small flying opponents that attacked from all directions. This usually required area effect weapons or exceptional speed. Dongmin planted his feet and began to spin his spear in an intricate pattern around his body. The weapon moved so fast it became a blur, creating a defensive barrier that no enemy could penetrate. But this was not just defense. Each time the spear completed a rotation, it struck down several enemies, its reach extending far beyond what should have been possible for a single weapon. Within minutes, all the swarm enemies lay destroyed around him, brought down by a weapon that had somehow been in multiple places at once. "How is he doing that?" Kira whispered to Tyke. "Do not know," the rock being rumbled back. "It is like the spear is alive." The fourth scenario was the most complex, multiple enemy types attacking simultaneously, requiring constantly changing tactics. Energy beings mixed with armored foes and fast movers, all coordinating their attacks to overwhelm the defender. Dongmin moved through this chaos like a dance partner who knew every step. His spear adapted constantly, sometimes thrown for ricocheting attacks, sometimes used as a staff for close combat, sometimes spun for defense, sometimes thrust with surgical precision. He seemed to anticipate every enemy move, countering attacks before they were fully launched. But it was the fifth and final scenario that truly amazed everyone. The boss-level enemy materialized, a massive creature combining every challenge from the previous scenarios. It Had energy attacks, heavy armor, fast-moving parts, and swarm like secondary weapons. It was designed to be nearly impossible for any single student to defeat. Dongmin faced this mountain of destruction with calm determination. He planted his spear in the ground point first and stepped back hands empty. "What is he doing?" Professor Veltar asked aloud. For a long moment, Dongmin simply stood still watching the massive enemy approach. Then he smiled and spoke a single word that everyone in the arena heard clearly: sleep. The spear began to glow with that golden light brighter than ever before. It rose from the ground on its own, spinning slowly in the air between Dongmin and the boss enemy. As it spun, the light grew stronger, spreading outward in complex patterns. The boss enemy struck with every weapon it possessed, energy beams and physical attacks filling the air. But none of them reached Dongmin. The spinning spear intercepted every attack, deflecting energy, absorbing impacts, protecting its wielder with impossible precision. Then the spear stopped spinning and hung motionless in the air, its point directed at the enemy's center of mass. Dongmin raised his hand and closed his fist. The spear shot forward with the force of a meteor punching through every defense the boss enemy possessed, but instead of stopping there, it continued to move, carving through the creature's entire structure in a spiral pattern that left nothing intact. When the simulation ended and the holographic enemies dissolved, Dongmin's spear returned to his hand one final time. The golden light faded, leaving only wood and the echo of something beyond technology. The arena was completely silent for nearly a minute. Then Professor Veltar began to clap slowly at first, then faster. Other faculty members joined in, then the students. Soon the entire arena was filled with the sound of genuine appreciation for what they had witnessed. But it was not just appreciation. It was recognition. They had seen something that challenged every assumption they held about technology, about power, about what made a weapon truly effective. They had seen humanity's secret, that the greatest weapons were not built in factories but forged in the human spirit itself. As Dongmin walked out of the simulation arena, his wooden spear held casually at his side, he moved with quiet dignity. The other students parted before him, not out of fear, but out of respect. They had learned something important today about the nature of strength and where it truly came from. The demonstration was over, but its effects would last far longer. The galaxy had been introduced to humanity in a way they had never expected, and they would never look at primitive weapons the same way again. The second challenge began with a show of raw power. Professor Veltar turned on the arena's defensive barriers and summoned massive target blocks made of reinforced trilithium, one of the strongest materials in the galaxy. Each block was 3 meters tall and 1 meter thick, designed to withstand the impact of small starship weapons. Second challenge power, the professor announced. Each student will show their weapon's destructive capability against these targets. Remember, raw force is often the difference between victory and defeat in real combat. Kira stepped forward first, her ice blade crackling with frozen energy. She raised the weapon above her head and brought it down in a perfect arc. Where the blade touched the trilithium block instantly, became so cold that its molecular structure changed, becoming brittle as glass. A second strike shattered it completely, sending frozen pieces scattering across the arena floor. The gallery erupted in cheers. Ice weaponry from Kira's homeworld was legendary for its ability to make any material vulnerable. Teak followed his mountain breaker, growing to twice its normal size, as he channeled his species' natural rock-shaping abilities into the weapon. The hammer struck the trilithium block with the force of a falling asteroid. The target did not just break, it was pulverized into fine powder, leaving a crater in the arena floor. More impressive demonstrations followed. Young Su's high-pressure water streams cut through trilithium like it was soft butter. Sujin's sound weapons created resonance frequencies that made the blocks tear themselves apart from the inside. Wujin's light weapons simply deleted sections of matter, leaving perfectly smooth holes where the trilithium used to exist. As each student performed, the crowd's excitement grew. These were weapons of incredible power, each representing the peak of their civilizations. Military technology. Then it was Dongmin's turn. He walked slowly to face his trilithium block, the wooden spear held casually. In one hand, whispers began in the gallery. How could carved wood possibly compete with weapons that could reshape matter or delete it entirely? This should be interesting, Professor Veltar muttered, adjusting his sensors to record whatever was about to happen. Dongmin stopped 3 meters from the block and studied it carefully. The trilithium gleamed with an inner light, its crystalline structure designed to absorb and distribute impact energy. It was by any reasonable measure indestructible. By primitive weapons, human Dongmin, the professor called out. The target awaits your attempt. Dongmin nodded but did not move forward. Instead, he began to spin his spear slowly in his hands, the wooden shaft creating a gentle whooshing sound as it cut through the air. As he spun it, something strange began to happen. The spear started to glow again, that same golden light that had appeared during the accuracy test. But this time the glow was stronger, pulsing with each revolution of the weapon. Students in the gallery leaned forward, their various eyes and sensors focused on the impossible sight. What is that energy signature? Professor Veltar whispered to his assistant. There is no energy signature, Professor, came the confused reply. Our instruments detect no technology, no power source, nothing but wood and something else we cannot identify. Dongmin's spinning motion grew faster, more complex. The spear seemed to blur in his hands, and the golden light spread from the weapon to his arms, then to his entire body. He looked like a statue carved from sunlight, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Then he moved. The attack was unlike anything anyone in the arena had ever seen. Dongmin did not just throw the spear or thrust it forward. He flowed into the motion like water, his entire body becoming part of the weapon's path. The spear shot forward not just with the strength of his arm, but with the accumulated force of his whole being. The weapon struck the trilithium block, with a sound like breaking thunder. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The spear stood embedded in the block, its wooden shaft vibrating gently. Then cracks began to appear, hairline fractures spreading out from the point of impact. The cracks glowed, with the same golden light spreading faster and faster until they covered the entire block. With a sound like a mountain, falling, the trilithium target split perfectly in half. Then quarters, then eighths, each piece falling to the arena floor with mathematical precision. But that was not the end. As the pieces fell, Dongmin extended his hand and spoke a single word in his native language, Dola Wa, come back. The spear pulled itself from the wreckage and flew back to his hand, trailing golden light, like a comet. As it settled into his grip, the light faded, leaving only polished wood once again. The arena was completely silent. Even the whispered conversations in the gallery had stopped. Professor Veltar's instruments were going crazy, showing energy, readings that made no sense, and material signatures that could not exist. The trilithium block had been destroyed more completely than by any of the high-tech weapons. Yet there was no trace of the energy that should have been required for such destruction. Impossible, breathed Kira, her ice blade forgotten in her hand. How does it work? Taik rumbled, his stone-like features showing rare confusion. Dongmin looked around at the amazed faces, then down at his spear. It works because it is not just a weapon, he said quietly. It is a promise, a promise. Professor Veltar managed to ask every human who ever carved a spear made the same promise. Dongmin explained that they would protect what mattered to them, that they would survive, no matter what stood in their way, that they would find a way to turn simple materials into something greater than the sum of their parts. He held up the spear, its wooden surface gleaming in the arena's light. This is not just carved oak. It is 10,000 years of human determination made solid. It is every parent who fought to protect their children, every hunter who brought food to their tribe, every warrior who stood against enemies that were bigger, stronger, and better armed. The golden light flickered around the spear one more time, then faded. That is why it works. Not because of technology or energy, but because of what it represents. And what it represents is humanity's greatest weapon, the refusal to give up. In the gallery, alien students began to whisper among themselves. They were looking at Dongmin with new eyes, seeing not a primitive human with a simple weapon, but something far more dangerous, a member of a species that had learned to put their very souls into their tools. The third and final challenge awaited, but already the outcome seemed less certain than it had that morning. Power they were beginning to understand came in forms they had never imagined. Students who had been confident in their advanced weapons now looked at them with uncertainty. If a simple spear could outperform plasma rifles and energy weapons, what did that say about their understanding of combat? What did it say about their assumptions about primitive versus advanced? Professor Veltar tried to process what he had just witnessed. His instruments had recorded everything but could explain nothing. The human had somehow imbued a piece of wood with properties that defied physics, turning it into a weapon more powerful than anything in the Academy's arsenal. As the arena prepared for the final challenge, the atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as an amusing demonstration of primitive weapons had become something else entirely. It had become a lesson about the true nature of power and where it really came from. The alien students were no longer laughing. They were watching and learning and beginning to understand that humanity might have secrets that their advanced civilizations had never discovered. 3 days after the weapon demonstration, the Galactic Military Academy was still buzzing with discussion about what they had witnessed. Students gathered in small groups throughout the crystal corridors, debating theories about how a simple wooden spear had outperformed the most advanced weapons in known space. In Professor Veltar's office, the four-armed instructor sat surrounded by data readouts, sensor logs, and analysis reports. Every instrument in the academy had been focused on Dong Min during his demonstration, yet none could explain what they had recorded. The energy readings are impossible. His research assistant reported, no power source, no technological signatures, no quantum fluctuations. According to our instruments, he accomplished those feats using nothing but carved wood and kinetic energy. Professor Veltar's eye stalk swiveled thoughtfully. And yet we all saw what happened. The spear moved independently, calculated impossible trajectories, returned to his hand on command, and somehow generated enough force to destroy targets that should have been invulnerable to primitive weapons. Soft chime indicated someone at the door. Enter. The professor, called Dong Min, stepped into the office, still carrying his wooden spear over. The past 3 days, other students had begun looking at both him and his weapon with new respect. Some had even asked if they could examine it, but the spear would not respond to anyone else's. Touch human. Dong Min. Professor Veltar said, rising from his chair. I wanted to speak with you. Part 1. The Academy of Worlds. The huge space academy floated between 3 bright suns in the darkness of space. Its crystal walls shone with light from distant stars, making it look like a giant diamond floating in the void. Inside the academy, thousands of students from different planets learned about war and peace and how to protect their worlds. In classroom, 737 students sat on curved wooden benches listening to their teacher. Professor Veltar was a strange-looking alien with 4 long arms that moved like snakes when he talked. His skin was purple and covered with small spots that changed color when he got excited. Today he was very excited because he was teaching about old weapons from different worlds. Look at these primitive tools, the professor said as he waved his forearms in the air. Above the students' heads appeared pictures made of light showing weapons from long ago. There were energy swords that glowed bright blue, plasma rifles that shot burning light, and quantum cannons that could destroy entire buildings. These are what lesser species used before they became smart. Like us, in the back row, sat Dong Min, a young human with dark hair and quiet eyes. He did not talk much, but he watched everything very carefully. His hands rested on the wooden bench beneath him. The bench was made from real earth oak, brought from his home planet, as something curious and strange for the other students to see. The other students were amazing to look at. There was Kira, who came from an ice planet. Her skin was blue like frozen water, and her hair looked like tiny crystals that made soft music when she moved. Next to her sat Tyke, who was made of living rock. His skin sparkled with tiny gems, and when he walked, the floor shook a little. In front of them were snake-like beings who coiled around their seats. Their scales changed colors like rainbows when they felt different emotions. Now let us look at the most funny weapons of all, Professor Veltar continued. The light pictures changed to show spears, swords, and bows. Sharp sticks, can you believe it? Some species actually threw pointed wood at their enemies, hoping to hurt them. The whole classroom started laughing. Students from gas planets made buzzing sounds like angry bees. The crystal beings chimed like broken bells. Even quiet Hana, who was like a walking plant with leaves for hair, shook with silent giggles. Her leaves rustled like wind through trees when she was amused. Dongmin said nothing. He looked down at the wooden bench under his hands. It was made from good oak with straight grain that ran from one end to the other. He could see that it would be perfect for what humans had been doing for thousands and thousands of years. Human Dongmin. The professor called out suddenly. Maybe you can tell us about these tools from your world. All the alien eyes turned to look at the young human. Some students leaned forward wanting to hear what he would say. Others could barely stop themselves from laughing out loud. Dongmin stood up slowly. He was not very tall compared to the floating energy beings and the giant rock people we used. What worked, he said in a calm voice. This made everyone laugh even more. Kira's crystal hair made tinkling sounds like wind chimes. What worked? She asked, making fun of him. Against what angry plants? The power of a weapon. Dongmin said, still speaking calmly, is not always about how much energy it uses or how far it can reach. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy does not expect. Professor Veltar turned his eye stalks to focus on the human. Are you saying that a pointed stick could fight against a plasma rifle that can turn a whole building into? Dongmin's lips made a small smile. I am saying that you should not judge something until you understand it completely. The professor's face showed he was both amused and curious. Very well, human, since you seem so sure about these primitive ways. Maybe you would like to show us tomorrow. We will have a practical test. Each student will pick a weapon from their world's history to use in combat training. The classroom buzzed with excited voices. Students started talking about what they would choose. Tyke said he would use the mountain breaker hammers of his people. Hana talked about thorn shooters that could go through metal armor. The gas cloud beings whispered about weapons that could freeze the air itself. And you, Dongmin, the professor, asked, what primitive weapon will you pick to embarrass yourself with? Dongmin ran his hand along the smooth surface of his bench one more time. The oak was perfect, aged and strong. In his mind he could already see what it could become. I will make something, he said quietly. This brought the biggest laugh yet. Students from all over the galaxy joined in, making their different sounds of amusement. Some slapped their desks, others flapped their wings, and a few changed colors quickly to show how funny they thought this was. Make something. Professor Veltar's voice was full of disbelief. From what Dongmin looked around the classroom at all the laughing faces, then down at his bench again. From whatever I can find. As class ended and students started leaving, they kept laughing about the humans' foolish confidence. They talked in their different languages about how tomorrow would be fun, watching the primitive human fail with whatever crude weapon he managed to put together. None of them saw that Dongmin stayed behind, running his hands along the oak bench and looking at its grain with the careful eyes of someone whose family had worked with wood for 10,000 years. None of them remembered that humans had taken over their entire world, armed with nothing but sharp sticks and the brain power to use them well. Tomorrow would be fun to watch, but maybe not in the way they thought it would be. The academy was quiet now. Most students had gone to dinner or back to their rooms to rest. But Dongmin stayed in the empty classroom. The only sounds were the soft hum of the crystal walls and the distant noise of students talking in the hallways. He stood up and walked around his bench, looking at it from every angle. The oak was beautiful, with dark grain lines running through the light-colored wood. It was old wood seasoned by time and weather. Strong, but not brittle. Flexible, but not weak. It was exactly what he needed. Dongmin thought about his home planet Earth, where trees grew slowly, fighting wind and rain and snow for many years. This made wood that was both tough and able to bend without breaking. His ancestors had known this. They had learned to pick the right wood for spears that would not break in battle. The ice. Young human smiled as he ran his fingers along the smooth surface. Tomorrow his classmates would bring weapons made with the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Energy weapons that could destroy buildings, plasma rifles that could melt metal, sound weapons that could break things apart just by making noise. But he would bring something different. He would bring 10,000 years of human knowledge carved into a piece of earth oak. He would bring the wisdom of every hunter who had ever thrown a spear to feed his family. Every warrior who had stood against bigger, stronger enemies with nothing but a sharp stick and courage. The other students thought he was foolish. They thought primitive meant weak, but Dong Min knew something they did not. He knew that the most dangerous weapon was not always the one with the most power. It was the one wielded by someone who refused to give up. As he left the classroom, Dong Min was already planning what he would do that night. He had work to do, important work that could not wait. The kind of work his ancestors had done around campfires for thousands of years, turning simple wood into tools that could mean the difference between life and death. Tomorrow would indeed be interesting, and maybe his laughing classmates would learn that primitive and weak were not the same thing at all.